Hello, Gen Genies. It's me, Julie.
And Rich.
Before we get started today, we want to let you in on some exciting news. We have launched our new Patreon page for the podcast.
Woohoo! We are super excited about this new chapter for CutOff Jeans.
So, Patreon is a website where listeners like you can pledge a small monthly amount. We're talking only $5 or $10, guys, to support the podcast and help defray the cost of bringing you the show each week.
To be clear, CutOff Jeans will continue to be absolutely free. But to thank you for your support, we are going to offer our patrons some fun little extras.
Like early access to the podcast every week, where you'll get to hear the latest episode before it's released to the general public.
And why not make your friends jealous with exclusive patron-only CutOff Jeans swag?
Fancy. And here's something you guys have been asking for, and I'm really looking forward to this. I'm going to host a monthly, hour-long, online Ask Me Anything session where patrons at the $10 level can literally ask me anything.
Anything? You're a brave woman, Julie.
You know, I know. I'm also going to give access to my blog, Are You My Father?, where I tell the story of my search, actually it's my life story basically, for my biological father in even more detail than I did on the podcast.
Wow, your blog was the original inspiration for CutOff Jeans, wasn't it?
It was.
Wow. Well, all patrons at any level will receive a shout out on the podcast along with our undying gratitude for your support.
Yep. You guys know that this show is a labor of love for me. It's something I'm very passionate about. It'd mean so much to me if you would consider supporting our work here on the podcast by going to patreon.com/CutOff Jeans podcast.
That's Patreon, patreon.com/CutOff Jeans podcast.
We'll add a link to it on the podcast and on the Facebook page. Thank you all, my Gen Genies.
And now, on with the show.
Woo!
Is your family tree a mystery? Are you fascinated by genealogy? Well, hip, hip, hooray, let's talk DNA with Julie.
The truth is in your genes.
In CutOff Jeans.
Welcome to CutOff Genes, the podcast that helps you find your truth using nothing but DNA. I'm Julie Dixon-Jackson, and I'm a genetic genealogist, henceforth known as a Gen Genie.
And I am Richard Castle, the co-host and producer of this podcast. How are you, Julie?
Happy, happy birthday. It is your special day. Happy, happy birthday. I was trying not to say anything until we recorded.
Oh, thank you for remembering my birthday.
I didn't remember. Facebook told me.
Oh, I know, but still. Isn't it funny on Facebook that suddenly everyone, like some girl that was in a play with me in the 5th grade in Gibbons Elementary School, wrote me a happy birthday, which was really sweet. Like I was like, oh, it's so nice to hear from you. I haven't seen you probably since high school, but it was lovely.
Right.
So.
Yeah.
It does make you feel good. So many times Facebook causes me so much stress and anger and like dismay. Yes. So it's nice on your birthday to have it actually be something where people are positive and it makes me feel good.
Birthdays are special on Facebook, even though I'm someone, as you know, hates my birthday. But I hate everything, so whatever.
So we have to start a podcast called What Julie Hates. We'll never run out of material.
Stuff I hate. It could go on forever.
And then we'll do the sequel, What Things That Julie Likes, and it'll be like one episode. Cut off curmudgeon.
That's me. Oh, my goodness. So anything exciting happening in your world?
Oh, it's been a slow news week, Julie. Let's see.
Not much
it's my birthday. Crazy people stormed the Capitol. What else? Tried to overthrow the government. Yeah. We shouldn't laugh, but I mean, what else can you do at this point?
3 words, Handmaid's Tale.
Oh, you know what? I thought the same thing, Julie, because in the first season, of course, I have not read the book, but in the first season, there was some clips on television of people going into Congress and shooting up the house, right?
That's what happened. Actually, I quoted, somebody I know quoted the book, and I lifted it from them and put it on my page. But yeah, she was talking about, there's a little passage where she's talking about before the president was murdered and the Congress was machine gunned.
Yes.
When things were normal. It's like, yeah, it's well, this whole last 4 years has felt very Handmaid's Tale to me. Just with the direction it seems that certain people want us to go in is frightening.
Yes.
Beyond belief.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I wonder, if in The Handmaid's Tale, if the people who stormed the Capitol left poop on the floor of the house, because that's what happened apparently.
I wonder if they have. I said somebody else mentioned that, like, can you get DNA from the human
Feces?
Feces, or I was going to say that. I was going to say matter or something.
Okay.
That was left there, but I've got a feeling they cleaned that up before they even think about that. Because gross.
Right. Well, I mean, they could still take a stool sample. I mean, I saw people carrying out stools. Lectern stools.
I get it.
Oh my gosh. But it's not like they even need the DNA, quite frankly. There were so many cameras, and those people were broadcasting it live or live streaming it. Yes. So there was really no hiding it. Like there's like a former Olympic gold medal winner, and there was somebody who'd just been elected to a local state government. I forget what it was now, but he was a politician. You're like, oh my God, there are people from all walks of life.
It's, yeah. I mean, it's the dumbing down of America is complete as far as I'm concerned. So we're moving in a new direction. And, now we know what they think of America. So.
Well, and I guess, I guess some people could say, what does this have to do with DNA and our podcast? And I would just say that, well, no, really, I would say that our podcast, as much as the fun we have on here, is based on science. It is a science-based podcast. Not that we talk a lot about science itself, because we try to make it light, but all this DNA
and
evidence.
We're not scientists.
No, we're not scientists. Yeah. But all this DNA stuff that we're talking about is based in science, and so therefore we are putting a belief in science, and that is the world I want to live in.
Exactly. It's important to, it's quite easy to distinguish between facts and made up stuff when you have actual scientific proof of things.
Yes, and not just rumor.
Yeah, with zero proof, and just because somebody says it over and over again doesn't make it true. Anywho.
What's going on in other DNA news besides the poop in the House of Representatives?
That's what I'm naming this episode that, by the way.
Just call it house poop for short.
House poop or capital poop.
As opposed to lowercase poop.
Yes. So this is from where did I see this? The DNA Doe Project. Gedmatch changed their policy. They subtly reworded it and updated it with effect from January 11th. An email was sent out to Gedmatch users, but Verigen failed to alert users to the full implications of the new site policy. What this change now means is that unidentified human remains are being matched against the entire Gedmatch database rather than just the subset of the database that has opted in.
What?
Yeah. So you know how you have to opt in now for them to go for law enforcement cases?
Yes.
This is not considered a law enforcement case. They're actually trying to identify unidentified bodies. So and that is not, they reworded it so they can do that, but there's been no fanfare about it. So maybe they were hoping it would go under, I don't know. And again, I don't care. I think it's great. Right now, they can, even if you've opted out, they can still look at your DNA if they're trying to identify human remains, like Jane Doe's bodies of people that they don't know who it is.
I kind of agree with that too. Yeah, if it can help identify and give voice to someone who might have been murdered or something, I don't see why I wouldn't. To me, it'd be like if someone were to ask me, "Do you know who this dead body is?" and I wouldn't say, "Oh, I don't want to get involved." I'd look and go, either yes, I do, or no, I don't. So I don't
want to get involved is such a problem. People that just are like, will look the other direction because it makes them uncomfortable and they don't want to be, don't want to have to to be present.
Right.
And I don't know. I don't understand that at all.
Well, again, that's sort of situational. Sometimes you just have to have boundaries around people that try to ask for too much of you. I've been in that situation.
I'm just talking about people that, like in that case of, what was her name? The woman in New York that was murdered on her street.
Oh, back in the
60s,
right?
Yes, and all of her neighbors heard her screaming, but nobody did anything about it because they didn't want to be involved.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
I mean, Kitty Genovese.
Oh, my gosh.
I think that was her name.
That was her name.
I just pulled that out of nowhere.
Wow.
You're welcome.
Yeah, that's pretty good. That's pretty good.
I don't know how I did that, frankly.
I don't either. Before the podcast, you couldn't remember the name of somebody you had worked with years ago, but you can remember Kitty Genovese.
Tim Ewing.
There you go. Wow.
It just came back to me.
It's like you just took some that magic pill that gave you like all your memories back. Give me that pill, Julie. I need it.
Okay, second piece of news. CNN ran a story that is important. So thousands of babies and children died in 18 of Ireland's mother and baby homes, church-run institutions where unmarried women were sent to deliver their babies in secret, often against their will, over 8 decades, according to a landmark report.
Wow.
So Ireland has just released this report. The Commission of Investigation into Mother and Baby Homes and Certain Related Matters, which was set up to investigate what happened in 14 homes and 4 county homes from 1922 to 1998. 1998 announced the 9,000 deaths as part of the final findings of its near 6-year inquiry. Around 56,000 people, from girls as young as 12 to women in their 40s, were sent to the 18 institutions investigated, where some 57,000 children were born. 1 in 7 of those children, 15%, didn't survive enough to leave the homes. Yet no alarm was raised by the state over the high mortality rates, even though it was known to local and national authorities and was recorded in official publications.
What were the causes of death? Do you know? Neglect?
I don't.
Yeah.
I mean, probably neglect and abuse. You know, what's interesting is that a lot of those, especially ones run by the Catholic charities, the movie Philomena?
Yes.
Which is what this is all about. So those women were, they had to stay there, have their baby, then the baby was kept there to await adoption, usually from Americans. And so the mothers got to see their babies all the time. Philomena's child was ripped from her arms when it was a toddler. And she had to watch these people take away her child that she'd bonded with. And, so they would... I'm not sure why they died, but probably because of the awful conditions.
How terrible. Well, I told you, I probably said this on the podcast at one time that, when my brother was born with Down syndrome, and this is in the mid-'60s, the doctors told my mom that he wouldn't live past, I think, 5. And I think they weren't lying. I just think that because most of those kids were institutionalized, they did die young because they didn't get the care.
They were neglected.
Yeah,
of course.
Yeah, my brother is still a healthy man, and he is in his mid-50s now. So,
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
That is so sad. I spoke to, I had a client that is older that was adopted that I was talking to this week. And I always like to, when I'm introducing myself, I like to tell them that I too am an adoptee. So I know, I know what you're thinking.
Right, sure.
Yeah. And it's so funny because a lot of them, we talked about, the effects of what being an adoptee had on us and what it was like. And so often, like this lady was like, oh, I'm that way too. It never even occurred to me that it would be because I was adopted. Like, it's exactly why.
Well, I noticed that in the interviews that you do on this show, that because you are an adoptee, when you are interviewing particularly adoptees, but not just adoptees, including birth mothers, because you can relate to them just from your business and from your life, I think that's what makes you such a good interviewer.
Thank you. That's
You're
nice.
welcome.
Yeah, I feel like I'm a part of it. I feel like I feel like an advocate too.
Sure.
For these people, for both biological children and biological mothers,
Sure.
frankly, because I so understand more where they're coming from and what they went through,
Right.
especially with stories like this.
And you're not just an adoptee, you're a mother too. So you have
Right.
that perspective as well. So
Yeah.
this wouldn't be the same podcast if we had done this, 20-something years ago before your kids were born.
You're right. And we wouldn't have done it, and it would have been a completely different, it would have been the musical theater podcast.
There'd be a lot more Broadway, folks.
It would just be all about Broadway.
The DNA of Broadway.
Broadway DNA, Broadway.
Anyway, I think we should take a little break, Julie, and come back and talk about some more stuff.
Okay, fine.
Let's do that. If you're enjoying our podcast, please subscribe, rate, and review. Or consider supporting us on our Patreon page, patreon.com/CutOff Jeans Podcast. Now back to Julie and me.
Okay, we're back.
Hello.
I got some stories from the trenches.
Stories from the trenches.
Okay, I have an update. Remember in the last episode, I talked about the mother that I'd sent the letter to and she never responded. So I called her and she said she hadn't got the letter and I told her why, blah, 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 blah. And she's like, it wasn't me. And she was just very matter of fact about it.
Yes.
And seemed to be actively trying to help me figure out who in her family it might be when it was her. So, and I was like, well, you have my number if you think of anything. So a couple days later, I get a phone call from that same number. And it's a younger woman. And she wouldn't tell me who she was at that point. And she just said, so, yeah, what is this all about? Can you explain this to me? So I explained it to her again and told her, the reason I think it's her is because we identified the father, and she has no sisters. We identified the father, so, and I know that whoever the mother is a child of these two parents that happen to be her two parents. There are no sisters, so I naturally decided
by
it
process
was her,
of deduction, Inspector Holmes.
Yes, and elimination. Yes, thank you. So she said, well, how do you know? How do you know who the father is? And I said, well, I the same process, and he had sisters, but none of them fit the criteria. They were all married already or were too young. And one of them, who would be the most likely, literally had another child the same year. So, I'm thinking, she can't be pregnant 6 months apart.
That's pretty tough.
Yeah. And she said, so then what does that mean? I'm like, well, okay, let's assume that maybe I was wrong in that respect, because it's possible. So it's one of who I thought were the father's sisters. Then you're telling me that, so it was her niece, by the way. I finally got that out of her.
The woman you were talking to was her niece.
Yes.
Okay.
This woman's father was who I think is the mother's brother.
Oh, okay. I see.
And there were two brothers, and I said, and actually I hadn't even looked at the brothers. I don't even know if I knew there were brothers, because I was looking for a female, and there was only one. And I said, well, would they have been, where were they at this time? She goes, oh, they were all up and down the East Coast. I'm like, oh, okay. So, and she goes, so then, what does this mean? I'm like, well, if I was wrong about who the father was, and it's actually the mother is from that other family,
yes,
then it would have to be a brother of hers. Mm-hmm. She's like, oh, okay. And I'm like, so
do you want to put the mother on?
Yeah, I guess I'll get on that and start looking at that. And she goes, well, okay. And, she kind of went, uh-oh, what have I done? Because now I was implicating her father.
Oh, dear.
So, so she hung up. I'm like, all right. Oh, and she said, well, we've just had this letter. And I said, what do you mean you've had this letter? And she goes, well, it's been here 2 weeks. I'm like, she told me she had never gotten it.
Right. But you know she did. Like, yeah. I mean, you sort of...
But I didn't... but I thought maybe she hadn't because it was at a post office box.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So I thought maybe she hadn't looked. So I was believing that. But when I told her the story, and now it explains why she was so casual. When I told her the story, she was braced for it already. She's quite the actor, that lady. And she said, well, you know, you send this random letter to a post office box, and then and I'm like, random? It was very professional, and you know, and I gave my number, and you know, why would she need to lie to me?
I guess it was random to her in that, like, she wasn't expecting it to come.
Well, sure, it's random, but it's not like, you know, I was very clear to identify who I was, and you know, I know how to do this anyway. And so she hung up after I told her, well, I'll keep working on it. Meaning I'll look into your dad then. Yeah. And then she calls back like 5 minutes later and she said, you know, I think it would be best if you didn't call this number again.
Oh, no, really?
Yeah. I was like, all right. I mean, I had already told the client that the mother had pretended it wasn't her.
It's got to feel so awful to know, like... Yeah. Because there's so many stories about people who have given up for children for adoption and who welcome them back because it's like, oh, they want to know that the child is okay or something, you know?
Yes.
And then to see this side of it where they just don't want anything to do with them it's.
And again, it's the shame. It's the you know, I have to. Part of me is like, I know this was traumatic.
Right.
And I have to. And which is why I said, you know, I know this may be a shock. If this is you have my number. And he has nothing. All he wanted to do was thank you.
Right.
So, or thank his mother. But, so yeah, I was surprised. I got a call back. So, but
the call back was sort of it was basically cutting off communication.
At first it wasn't.
No, but she ended by saying, don't call this number again. So,
well, she called back. She called back and said that after she had time to think about it or talk about it with somebody in the room.
Yeah.
Because I heard other voices in there, which was probably her husband.
Well.
Or father. I don't know. Anyway, so yeah, there's always something. I'm going to give you one more from the trenches.
Yes.
There was a mother that I found in the Boston area and wrote to her and explained that this person was born on this day in this hospital and showed her what he looked like. He has a spitting image of her, all this stuff. So she actually responded to him before she responded to me, but then she responded to me as well later just to see what, you know, wanted to know how I did this. And then said, so what now? We should do a blood test? I said, what for? And she said, well, to make sure it's true. And I'm like, well, you had a baby on that day, right? Well, yeah. I'm like, in that hospital, right? Yes. I'm like, and you've seen the picture. But she was, that is fascinating to me, how somebody who fit the criteria, I found them literally just from DNA.
Right.
And she, not word of mouth, nothing other than she had relatives that matched her, and I figured it out that way. But she's...
Well, I mean, for people who don't do this like you do, they may not understand the technology or the science behind it, right?
Well, right. But yes, absolutely.
And in the old days, they would say like, oh, you've got to do a blood test to see if this was the father of the child or something, right?
Yeah, but if it's the mother of the child.
I know, when you had you had the baby.
You actually were in that hospital and had a baby on that day. What are the odds?
Yeah. What a coinkydink.
Yeah.
You know what I'm in the mood for now, Julie?
What?
A listener question.
Oh, I have listener questions.
We've got a lot of listeners and a lot of questions, so...
Let's go with Patty's. Patty O'Donnell, our friend of the show, Patty O'Donnell.
Yes.
She asked roughly what proportion of the adoptees that you interacted were given the correct father name versus being told the wrong person, which was subsequently disproven by DNA.
Okay.
Exhibit A, moi.
Yes.
And her as well.
Yes.
That's right. Patty went through that as well. I would say 60-40. When somebody says, she said his name is this, that is the first name I search for in the DNA. And if I can't find it in any of the trees in the DNA, it's probably not true. I can usually, the first day, figure out whether or not that was true. So I would say more than almost half, which is interesting. Or they put the wrong, different name on the DNA, on the birth certificate. So once you get the birth certificate, it has, or it's their husband's name.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So more often than not, I keep wanting to go back to more often than not, but I'm in the place where I think everybody lies. So
Because you have to prove, even if they're telling the truth, you want to prove it. You want to have proof.
yeah, well, and that's what I have to tell people. I have to tell clients when they're like, "Well, I was told this and this and this and this and this," and I'm like, "Okay, I've got that all written down, but just so you know, I'm just looking at DNA."
Right.
So if I come up with a completely different name and I'm pretty sure about it, that means that you were lied to. And it happens.
And as we know, people lie, and families, there are always skeletons in the closet and family secrets and all that. So, indeed. I think we should take another little break.
All righty then.
Thank you for listening to Cut Off Jeans with Julie Dixon Jackson and Richard Castle. You can support us by going to patreon.com/Cut Off Jeans podcast. Now, back to the program.
All right, we're back, and it is story time.
Yay!
So I had a extended conversation with Jessica Stavena the other day, and this is the first of 3 or 4 episodes.
Wow.
Because Jessica has a lot to say, and it's a great story. Yeah, it's interesting and timely, although the timeliness of it isn't going to be that evident in this particular segment.
Well, I always love a good yarn, so multi-part story is good. Well, let's listen into part 1.
Let's. Hey guys, I have on the line Jessica Stavena. Hi, Jessica.
Hello, how are you?
I'm great. Thank you so much for talking to me today. You have a terrific MPE story. Well, terrific in some senses, I guess. in one that so many of us have them. But it's also very timely because we've been talking about this particular event quite a bit lately.
We have, absolutely.
Yes, we have. Okay, so can you tell us our story? Tell us your story, not my story, from wherever you want to start.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here and, of course, share this crazy story and peel back all these layers of this onion that...
that continues to wanting to be peeled.
I live in really Pearland, Texas, but Houston, technically. And I'm 33 years old. So my entire life, just to kind of start from the beginning, I guess, I have always known, my mom has always been very transparent with me that I was donor conceived. And that was actually part of my story that I cherished. You know, I told, and I was a little chatty Cathy as a kid, so I would tell anyone who would listen or even look at me or be in my presence. You know, I just thought that was so cool that I was donor conceived and that, you know, my mom really wanted to have me, and she went through all these treatments to get me here kind of situation. Well, my mom was actually married for, 17 or 18 years before I was born.
Okay.
So I have a birth certificate father who was a part of the whole, going through the process with my mom and pregnancy and everything. And I actually have a brother who's 17 years older than me.
Oh,
so, wow. Yeah. So after my oldest brother was born, when he was about 2 years old, my mom had another baby, and that baby actually passed away at 2 days old due to hospital neglect.
Oh, no.
So, yeah, it was a very, very traumatic, very awful situation. So after losing that newborn baby, for 13 years after that, she prayed and prayed and prayed and just tried everything to figure out, she wanted another baby. She wanted a little girl. And finally, my mom's doctor had my dad's sperm count checked. He ended up being sterile. He had measles or the mumps or something when he was younger, so he wasn't able to produce anymore. So under the direction of her doctor, he recommended them see a fertility specialist, and he was a very highly selected and recommended fertility specialist in East Texas. And so my mom then, called and scheduled an appointment and began her fertility treatment in 1984. So from 1984 to 1986, my mom went through fertility treatments, receiving artificial insemination or, donor sperm. She would go, anywhere between 1 to 2, 4 times a month, depending on the direction of her doctor. She had multiple pregnancies, but all ended in miscarriage. Several of the pregnancies ended in multiple, having twins and things like that would miscarry. So finally, in June of 1986, she finally had a successful pregnancy. And then in March 1987, I was then born. When I was about 2 years old, my mom and my birth certificate father got a divorce. He was very physically abusive through their entire marriage. And she, at this point, it had been 19, 20 years been married. And she just, she didn't want to be in that environment anymore. And especially having this baby that she had prayed so hard for and gone through all these treatments for, she just didn't want to raise me in that environment. So she made her exit. And whenever I was 7, we actually then moved to Pearland, Texas.
Okay.
Which is about a 3.5 hour trip away from East Texas. So as a child, I would go see my birth certificate father, on the weekends or holidays or summers. I would spend a lot of time. I would have my mom, because I wanted to go see him. I would have my mom, she would drive me down there, drop me off, come back to Houston, and on Sunday, turn around 2 days later, drive back out there, pick me up. He may have come and got me and brought me back maybe twice. It was my mom other times, yeah. So I would go for weekends and holidays and summers and things like that to spend time with him because, I wanted to hang out with my dad too, right? He's my dad. But the summer after my freshman year, I really started to realize that, I was going down there and wanting to spend time with him, but he wasn't really spending time with me. He would go off hunting or fishing and leave without telling me, and so I couldn't go. And I got to the point where I was like, you know what, my eyes are open now and I can really see what's going on. And I'm not going to keep trying on a relationship that I'm not getting that back. So I stopped having my mom take me down there. And from the age of 14 to 17, I would call him very periodically, maybe once a week, maybe, twice a week, just calling to check on him, say hi. Every time I would call, I would have to leave a voicemail. And I would never get a call back. And so at 17 is when I finally pulled the trigger and was like, all right, this part of the situation I'm not doing anymore. I was just like, all right, that's it. And then, like I said, I'm 33 years old, so I haven't had contact with him. I've only seen him maybe twice during that time, and he's had no contact with me. It was only because, at my nephew's high school graduation and my aunt's funeral, never would approach me. And this is very small town situation, so we're in very close quarters. Then fast forward, I actually ended up marrying my high school sweetheart, and we have 3 kids. So we have a 14-year-old, a 7-year-old, and a 5-year-old. And a little bit before my pregnancy with my last child, I started having some very strange health issues. Just things that could not be diagnosed by doctors. I was going to see, all these different doctors to try to diagnose what was happening to me. Then after pregnancy, same thing. So one of the last doctors that I saw, she actually told me, you know what, let's do all these labs. You should really think about taking a DNA test, since I knew I was donor conceived. And she's like, I want you to read these 2 books, and then after we do your labs and maybe take your DNA test, let's circle back around to some things and we can kind of tease through it together. Well, me being me, I'm a busybody. I put myself on the back burner and I just go with work, kids, life. I, paid for this $700 lab test to be done that I never did. I didn't buy the DNA test and I didn't read the books. So clearly I failed, right? I'm like, fast forward a few years after that, which brought us to 2019 Christmas. My brother-in-law bought my mother-in-law a 23andMe and ancestry and health kit. So at Christmas, she opened it up, did it, sent it off like 2 days after Christmas. January 2020, she got her results in, and she was like so excited to show us. And she was going through the app, and I was looking at it with her. And I was like, you know what? Maybe if I do this, maybe it will give me some sort of direction, to figuring out all these health issues that are going on in my life. Maybe that's what I need. And I totally forgot about that doctor telling me to do it. So I want to pause on that just for a quick second, because I want to back up to a situation. So in 2008 or 2007, my husband was in the Marine Corps, and we were actually stationed in San Diego, California. My son was like not even one. And I was actually sitting on the floor with him. So I'm 20 years old. I'm sitting on the floor with my 1-year-old. And an episode of Oprah is playing in the background. And I wasn't really listening. It was just playing. And then they started talking about this donor sibling registry. And of course, my ears perked up. I was like, oh, what? So then I started really listening. And then I went on the donor sibling registry website, whatever.org. And I'm like I'm getting on here and I'm like trying to create an account. So I'm like, oh my gosh, I can figure out if I have siblings. Maybe I can find out who my biological father is. And so I'm getting on there, and you need your donor number in order to then, for them to, on this platform, then try to connect you with other siblings or your donor, right? So I called my mom immediately, and I'm like, hey, I just was watching this episode of Oprah, and they're talking about donor sibling registry. I could figure out if I have siblings and maybe my donor. I just need the donor number. And she's like, oh, gosh, Jessica, I don't even know. I don't know what that is. And I was like, well, is your gynecologist, your OB, is he still in practice? She's like, it's been, 20 plus years. I don't know. So she called his office, and he was still in practice. And so she requested to see if she could get a copy of her records and to see if we could get the donor number that may have been in her file. Well, they told her, back then, well, first of all, we don't even have those records anymore. It's past, 7 to 10 years, whatever. But whenever we started the donor program, there was never any numbers really tied to the donors. And so that wasn't really a record that was kept. And so my mom just thought, okay, that was kind of strange, because I remember picking a donor off a donor catalog with nothing by a number.
Right.
And next to that donor number, there is, their ethnicity, their height, their weight, their, hair color, eye color, their profession, their educational background. Obviously there was no name. So she just thought that was very odd.
Right, but they have to be able to identify them some way.
Exactly.
Huh.
Just took it as, okay, they don't have it. There's no way I'm going to get it. So my mom called me back, and she's like, well, got some good news and bad news. The good news is, he's still in practice. Practice is still open, but the bad news is they don't have my records, and they don't have a donor number. They weren't really keeping donor numbers at that time. So at that point, I honestly just kind of thought, you know what? Now this missing puzzle piece is gone forever, and this puzzle will never be complete. Like, I will never know who my donor is. I'll never know if I have siblings. My mind just kind of shut that part down. Was like, this is never going to happen.
Yeah, that's an awful feeling too.
I always had this picture painted in my head that I was, if I found out who my biological father was, like, how would I approach him? Would I, go running, arms open wide? Like,
right.
Would he want to know me? Yeah. Would he allow me to go, I don't want to overstep any boundaries, but, I just had this like whole scenario, different scenarios kind of played out. Like, how would this go down?
Yeah.
So at that point, that was in, it was in 2007. I'm sorry. Yeah. 2007. So I was 20 years old. So at that point, I never, thought much more about it or tried to dig any deeper. And because I just thought, okay, well, that's it. That's it, right? I have no other way of knowing. Mm. Well, then Ancestry became, it's really started coming to light, and people were really talking about it. And one of my uncles was super into genealogy and doing our family tree. But I thought with Ancestry, you had to know the family members' names and their information and put them in on this tree, and then it connects you that way. So I never thought about DNA testing being a thing, you know?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, it's a lot of people still don't realize that.
Exactly. And that's when, like, I'm like, Jessica, like, I cannot believe you just did not open up your mind to think beyond, you know, like I'm very creative, and I'm a fact finder. I ask tons of questions. I need to know things. And for some reason, this whole scenario, my brain just shut down, and I just was not. It's the wildest thing. I literally sit back daily and think about, like, why did you not push this? Like, why?
Maybe it was like a subconscious protective thing that you were doing.
Maybe it was.
Yeah. You know what I mean? Maybe you were like afraid of opening that can of worms because you didn't know. You know, I think a lot of people feel that way, especially men. In cases like this, men search way less than women do. And I think it's just because that they're not emotionally ready to face it. And for you, I'm sure you were emotionally ready, but maybe you just were protecting yourself, you know, you're being vigilant.
I think so. Yeah, it has to be some aspect of that my brain was just like, nope, not today, Jessica.
Yep.
So anyway, at that point, I just thought all hope was lost. I will never know siblings, father, whatnot. Like, that's it. So then in January 2020, when my mother-in-law got her results back, I was like, okay, I'm going to do this. I got the 23andMe for Ancestry and Health.
Right.
For probably about a week, I held on to this 23andMe box. Looked at it every morning and every day when I got home and left for work. And just, I don't know, there was just a part of me that was like, okay, I know I'm doing this for the health thing to figure out maybe what's going on, but there's this part of me like, what if I do find siblings, you know, like, what if there's more out there? So after about a week of just staring at this 23andMe box, picked it up, put it in my work bag, dropped my kids off at daycare, kids at school, on my way to work. And I'm sitting at a red light, actually, and I'm trying to create a substantial, like an ungodly amount of spit. I'm like, oh, this will be easy. Just up to that line. No, that's a lot of spit.
It's always shocking, like, isn't it?
It's like, and so, you know, I'm trying to create all this spit to spit in this tube, and this vehicle pulls up beside me. This guy's like looking at me like I've lost my mind spitting in this tube. And I'm like, oh God, this is awkward. Anyway, so, you know, follow the instructions, download the app, register it.
How funny.
So then I start getting notifications, you know, like, your kid is on its way. It gives you all these updates.
Yeah.
Sunday, February 23rd, so 2/23, I'm playing in my girls' room. We're just having a good time, Sunday morning, PJs. And I go to my room to go check my phone, see if my mom's called, you know, of course, do your usual scroll through Instagram and Facebook situation. And as soon as I grab my phone off the charger, I get a notification from 23andMe saying my DNA results were ready. And then as soon as my eyes read this notification, it was almost like somebody hit the mute button, and I just froze. And my husband was sitting on the bed on his phone doing something, and he's talking to me, but I'm not hearing anything that he's saying. I'm like, oh my God. Again, I know I did this for try to get some answers for a health situation, that this all this undiagnosed stuff that's been going on, but this could be it, or this could be, I find out I have no siblings. The moment of truth situation. Finally, I just look at him. He's like, what is wrong with you? And I'm like, my results are, and he's like, what results? I'm like, the 23andMe. He's like, what? He like does this like jump over the bed like a kangaroo or something. Like, I'm like, oh my God. And, you know, he's like, oh my God, let me see. So I go to open the app, and the first thing you see before several of the updates that it has done is, you know, you see your ethnicity, you know, your background and all that. And so I'm looking through all that, and I'm blindly looking through it. You know, I'm looking at it, but I'm not really looking at it. And I'm looking on there, and he's like, get to the good stuff. Go to the DNA relatives. So finally I see it, and I press DNA relatives. And when I click on it, it says loading your relatives, and it begins spinning and spinning and spinning. I'm like, oh my God, this feels like eternity. Like, come on. So it was probably 30 seconds. I'm just being dramatic. It finally, when it stopped spinning and the results popped up, it said I had 3 half siblings.
And that's the end of part 1. Thank you, Jessica.
Thank you, Jessica.
And Jessica, as the story unfolds, will be posting links to the group as well. It's
great.
It's something that's unfolding presently. It happened. It started during COVID. So
It is fresh and up to date.
yes.
Speaking of fresh and up to date,
Yes.
I am Richard Castle.
Nice.
And I have a website, richardcastle.com, where you can learn all about my musicals and my piano playing. And then you could also follow me on the Twitter or on the Instagram at Castle Songs.
Can people watch your musical presently?
No, not yet. But you can see a play I wrote called Virtual Happy Hour. And I did post a link in the Facebook page for that. But it's leftedgetheater.com. And it's part of the Hindsight 2021 Festival. So you could see my play, Virtual Happy Hour. It runs this Friday and Sunday, and then it'll be on demand after that through February 14th.
Oh, cool. Okay. Check that out. Okay. I'm Julie Dixon Jackson. You can find me on the Twitter at Jules Jackson with 2 O's. Find the podcast, CutOff Jeans Pod, on the Twitter. Join the Facebook group, CutOff Jeans Podcast. Send me an email, julesjackson@cutoffjeans.com. Please keep asking questions in the group so that I can answer them here. They're lots of fun, and it makes me think, which is hard to do. Okay, and one more thing, everybody. Wear your mask, socially distance, and the truth is in your jeans.